Trump's deportation operations unraveling in the Twin Cities. The president makes big changes after this weekend's shocking killing of local ICU nurse Alex Preddy. Can the city get back to normal? And a local Fox News reporter on his harrowing journey to the peak of Mount Everest, and why he did 22 push-ups when he got to the top. Welcome to the Chicago Report. I'm Schutz. The developments out of Minneapolis are fast moving tonight. Out is controversial Border Patrol Commander Greg Bavino. In is controversial border czar Tom Homan. This as President Trump says he has had productive conversations with Minnesota Governor Tim Walz and Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey to try and take the temperature down. This all after this weekend's shocking killing of 37-year-old VA nurse Alex Preddy. White House spokeswoman Caroline Leavitt had a starkly different message today than some of the comments that came from DHS Secretary Kristi Noem and White House Senior Advisor Stephen Miller in the immediate aftermath.
Nobody in the White House, including President Trump, wants to see people getting hurt or killed in America's streets. This includes Renee Good, Alex Preddy, the brave men and women of federal law enforcement, and the many Americans who have been victimized at the hands of illegal alien criminals. As President Trump said yesterday, the administration is reviewing everything with respect to the shooting, and we will let that investigation play out.
Count Illinois Governor J.B. Pritzker among those who don't think this is the way to dial things down. Quote, sending Tom Homan to Minnesota is like pouring gasoline on a fire. The chaos is the point. Let's stop sending Trump officials in and start sending Trump's agents home, end quote, from Governor Pritzker today. Now, the reverberations are being felt in Washington, where most Senate Democrats appear to be holding firm on their vow to reject a funding package for DHS. That is something that could lead to a partial government shutdown starting at the end of this week. Illinois Democratic Senator Tammy Duckworth says it's what her constituents want.
That's overwhelmingly what my constituents have asked me to do. Do not vote to fund ICE. And what I think most Americans would rather have me support them and stand up to the Trump administration. All we're asking the Republicans to do is to pull out the funding for DHS, and let's work on fixing the problems in it, and let's work on adding things that will rein in ICE. I want money to go back to our local law enforcement.
And Republicans would need 7 Democrats to sign on to break a filibuster. And our own Fox 32 correspondent, Say Kwan, has spent the weekend in the Twin Cities giving us a view from the ground. Earlier today, she told us about the scene that has emerged where Preddy was shot and killed.
I'll show you the memorial here because it has grown so much over just the last 2 days. This shooting, this deadly shooting of Alex Preddy happened here on Saturday. I was out here on Saturday night. There were huge crowds of people just paying their respects, laying things like flowers and lighting candles. Things have been very peaceful here. Things have been, very calm. Everyone's hugging each other. Business owners are opening up their shops, putting their safety on the line also, even with these federal agents around, opening their doors and making sure that people have a place to kind of warm up. When it comes to these protests and rallies, for the most part, what we have seen is people just making their voices heard.
And joining us now with more are Eddie Johnson, former superintendent of the Chicago Police Department, Robert Pape, director of University of Chicago's Project on Security and Threats, and Walter Olson, a senior fellow at the Cato Institute, a libertarian think tank based in Washington, D.C. It's a pleasure to have all of you joining us here. Eddie, I'll start with you because all we have to go on are these multiple cell phone videos and the multiple angles of this shooting. But when you look at it from a policing perspective, would you classify this as a bad shoot?
Yeah, from what I've observed thus far, I would have to say from the angles of the video that I've seen, it is very questionable. And it appears that the federal agents caused the obstruction. And at the very least, some excessive force was used, in my opinion, from what I've seen thus far.
And again, the DHS authorities have vowed a full and thorough investigation here to get to the bottom of whether this was justified or not, although public opinion on both sides of the aisle right now seems to be very skeptical of that. Robert, we mentioned the recalibration today. As many Republicans are coming out expressing concern, is this a positive sign in your mind to de-escalate the situation?
It is a positive sign. It's a step, but it's important to see that this is a baby step. I mean, the difference between Homan and Bovino, it's real, but it's also small. So in the grand scheme of things, this is not just another day. This isn't like we haven't had enough series of political violent attacks. The context is so critical here, Paris. We've had a year since President Trump has taken office. We have had a surge of political violence in the United States. We've had the assassination of a Democratic state leader, Hortman. We've had the assassination of Charlie Kirk. We've had these multiple, not just one, but multiple. And yes, we can say they're questionable, but the fact of the matter is this is a surge of political violence that is occurring. It's not all occurring by one side or the other. Our surveys, we track the attitudes of support for political violence in the United States. Before these events, you already had essentially a third of Republicans and a third of Democrats supporting political violence, 10% supporting political violence against the other. We are a tinderbox getting worse, and these events are on top of that. So this is helpful, and yes, we should have more, but there needs to be a lot more if we're going to de-escalate this situation.
In Minneapolis, ground zero for that tinderbox right now, Walter Olson, the administration has pointed to the fact that he was armed, saying things like, well, don't show up to a protest armed. But to be clear, does the Second Amendment protect his right to carry in that situation?
I think this has really roused the Second Amendment community because what the administration has been saying is inconsistent with what conservatives have been fighting for, frankly, for 50 years. Now, the law differs from state to state. Some states do control bringing it to a demonstration, but in this case, I haven't seen any indication that he violated any Minnesota law. And we know from Trump's own supporters marching in different cities that, of course, they've marched with much more visible, much more threatening looking firearms. So this is going to be something where a lot of conservatives have to go back to their principles and check them.
Eddie Johnson, we've talked about this a few times. You've commented here in Chicago on the tactics that you've seen from these federal agents, noting that a lot of them local police outlawed decades ago because they were ineffective and they were seen as unsafe. When you look at what's happening in Minneapolis and what you saw in Chicago, do you believe these tactics are further agitating the situation, or is it the result of local officials telling people to protest, or a little bit of both?
I think that the tactics, it appears to me, Paris, that they're severely undertrained to handle situations like this. When you look at CPD, we often try to de-escalate, especially on a skirmish line like that. When you looked at that gentleman the other day, it just appeared that he was filming with his cell phone and that they created the confrontation with the female initially and then him. Now, I will concede it wasn't very smart to take a firearm to a protest like that, but from what I've seen so far, it didn't appear that he violated anything. So yeah, I think their tactics are flawed. I don't think that the conversation coming from the mayor and the governor really played into that with this particular incident, because these individuals appear to just be filming on their cell phones what they were observing. And like I said, I can see that it wasn't very smart to take that firearm there, but it just appears to me that they just are not trained to deal with those types of situations.
And we've seen, I've covered so many protests or crowd control situations from CPD and looked at the tactics used, like, holding a line, kettling. I've rarely ever seen munitions deployed, but we've seen it in pretty much every instance here in Chicago and of course, in Minneapolis with some of the tear gassing. Robert Pape, you've made the point that you think that this has all been kind of building on top of each other to get folks used to militarization of cities, especially in time for the midterms. Do you still think that that's something that's going on underneath the surface here?
I don't know. I can't tell you what's in President Trump's mind. What I can tell you is there's a through line in his international aggression and his domestic aggression, and that is the use of force. And it's the use of force in very aggressive ways. You'll recall that he said months ago with Border Patrol and ICE, they spit, we hit. Now, that's the opposite of de-escalation. What President Trump has been talking about, whether it's Venezuela, whether it's Greenland, whether it's they spit, we hit, is escalation dominance. That is upping the ante at every stage. And what you are getting is, whether it is Carney, who is basically had enough, or the Europeans saying, we're mobilizing troops, or whether it's Minnesota, we're mobilizing the National Guard. People just aren't going to put up with this over and over and over again. I believe that what you've just heard is correct. There is a tactical set of issues. I think this is problem coming from the president. This is, remember, he went and spoke to 800 generals and admirals for the first time in history, brought them all together to say that the problem is democratic cities. He said these are his words. And we need to have test beds in those democratic cities, because they're the internal enemy, and they could either get on board or resign. That was some pretty tough talk on September 30th, and this is playing out.
Well, Mr. Olson, even Republicans now have come forward saying they want a thorough investigation. DHS has said they will take control of the investigation. There have been some questions as to the preservation of evidence. FBI will ostensibly have a role here. Do you expect a thorough and proper investigation into a justification of use of force?
I wish I could, but the people who are going to be in charge here are the same agencies who have led us down this path, and the same agencies that only a week or two ago said was not going to be an investigation of the killing of Renee Good. So miracles could happen. They could bring in a new team. But what they did with that evidence, a scandal in itself, they did not follow any proper procedures on preserving the evidence. We don't know what's been destroyed. So they are working to recover a whole lot of trust that has quite properly been lost. The misstatements they went on making, even after the videos, disproved them.
And those statements claiming that he was there to do maximum damage against police officers. Again, some members of the administration walking those back. But Superintendent Eddie Johnson, what about the fact that the Minneapolis police superintendent saying that they were pushed away from the crime scene? They wanted to secure the scene. They wanted to investigate it, close it off. And the feds basically said, stay in your lane. I mean, is that unusual to you? In that situation, do you typically work with federal agents?
Yes. So my time as superintendent, not just superintendent, but as a Chicago police officer, we worked hand in hand with federal agencies when things of this nature occurred. It didn't happen often, but we often offered the support in terms of securing the crime scene and assisting them with the recovery of evidence. And I just don't see that now. So I'm hopeful, but I have to be honest and say I'm not confident that we'll get a transparent investigation at all. At least one of your guests mentioned that the same people are in charge, and that's just not very. It doesn't lead to confidence in me that we're going to get what we want. Because if you remember, Paris, while I was superintendent, one of my cornerstones was being transparent, and the fact that they're not allowing local officials to at least assist is troubling to me, because I, for one, from what I see now, I just don't trust that we'll get what we need in terms of a transparent investigation.
And Robert Pape, I mean, these are state charges. The Hennepin County District Attorney could investigate. Do you expect that they'll be able to do a state investigation parallel to whatever the feds are doing?
Well, the problem is that they need cooperation. The state needs some cooperation from the federal agents here. And as you're hearing from the superintendent and your other guests, that in order to do things like preserve evidence and be able to have, and so if they in fact are impeding that, they're essentially obstructing that. And this is not going to work. So these are why what you're hearing across the board, and this isn't just a Democrat-Republican, split anymore. You are really seeing a tremendous problem, because it is quite clear that the local community, the local leaders do not have political control in their areas. And if we have a Democratic president, do the Republicans really want that to happen, where we say you have concealed carry? Well, now you get to not just be removed here, but we can kill you. I think this is what you're really seeing. We're breaking many thresholds here, and these are thresholds that it's going to be very difficult to put these genie back in the bottle, because again, this is not just a one-off situation. You're having multiple instances of political violence. You just had a major issue with Operation Midway Blitz. Now we have this triple with Minnesota. Where is this going next is the fundamental problem here. And we're going to have the midterms in November. This is not a good situation. We need a fundamental pause in these ICE operations. We need to elevate this.
And Governor Pritzker has called for abolishing ICE, and I try to make the point that there are two different agencies here, Customs and Border Patrol, which at least in Chicago, they were behind some of the more flamboyant.
I did not say abolish. I want to be clear.
No,
I am not saying the words abolish ICE.
Correct.
This is, I think, by the way, just a mistake here, and I don't mean to, be critical of anybody, but this is not what I mean by a pause. We need a pause. Right. This is now turning into a seriously conflictual situation. We basically need a pause, and then hopefully we can have some cooler heads prevail.
Right, and some of the Democrats have come out basically for abolition, but I'm just trying to make the point that Customs and Border Patrol, they're newer to doing this kind of enforcement in urban areas, not at the border. They've been behind some of the more escalating activity we've seen than ICE has been. So there's a distinction here, and it gets lost. But you do hear these calls to abolish or reform. Walter Olson, are those realistic? Is it realistic to just talk about doing a wholesale cleaning of house?
Well, cleaning house is an interesting phrase, because I've heard suggestions that we keep the legitimate functions, and everyone agrees there are a lot of them, and move them to a clean slate, a new agency with different people and different leadership. So I would give that a listen. In the meantime, there's so much that we could do, practice by practice, rule by rule. We've been talking about firearms. Alex Pretty did not brandish and did not produce his firearm. I'd like the agents told that they should not be brandishing and they should not be waving around their firearms or pointing them at motorists, which they've done, here in Maryland where I live. I'd like them, what would really, I think, turn the corner is if an order went out saying, take off those masks. Face the public the way that people in your agencies have always done until this year.
All right, great points here. Eddie Johnson, Robert Pape, Walter Olson, thank you all so much for your time. We appreciate it.
Thank you. Thank you.
And when we come back, a journey to the top of the highest peak in the world with a Chicago-based Fox News correspondent. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Chicago-based Fox News correspondent Mike Tobin has reported from war zones around the world, but a personal assignment this summer might have been the toughest of his life. He attempted to summit the tallest peak in the world, Mount Everest, and he documented it in a new film streaming now on Fox Nation.
Summit is a widely recognized prize. Having spent decades climbing, laws of attraction almost mandate that I would eventually be drawn to her, the highest peak of them all.
And Mike Tobin joins us now. Mike, love seeing you out in the field, covering the mayor and the schools and crime and whatnot. But wow, I mean, I watched the clips of this video. What made you determine that you were ready to do this?
Well, I had knocked off the 6th highest mountain in the world. And so Everest was only 2,000 feet higher, and I could see it from the summit of the mountains called Schutz. And my teammates on that climb turned around and did Everest a few months later. And it was only another 2,000 feet. And 2,000 feet, when you're training for the big mountains, that's just a training day. So I was like, oh man. But then COVID happened, and all my plans got trashed for a little while. And last October, one of the guys, no, 2 Octobers ago, one of the guys who was on my team said, hey, we got a spot for you on the team. Think you can make it?
And do you think about the bodies that have been lost and
well, we passed by
up
them.
there? You passed by them?
Yeah.
Does that enter your mind when you're training, the anxiety, the worry of what could happen?
When you're in camp, acclimatizing, you know the pace we keep in this business and the pace that most adults keep now, there's not a lot of time for reflection. And you get into camp and you're acclimatizing, you got time, and your thoughts come at you.
Wow.
And when you're doing something like Everest, there's a lot of self-doubt.
Wow. Think about what you have in store the day ahead.
The next day or when it's coming, and it's hard to think. You look, you can see Mount Everest from base camp the whole time.
Right.
And it's hard to think, oh, I got this.
Wow. I mean, I think the tallest mountain I've ever scaled was Ben Nevis in the Scottish Highlands. So and that looked tall to me, and I was like, wow. But let me ask you this: one of the most fascinating parts of the movie, you're talking about how you train. You live in Chicago. How do you train for that kind of altitude, for that kind of climb, when the largest hill here seems to be landfill?
I think it's the Montrose Sledding Hill.
Montrose Sledding Hill, right. You're training on there with your dog.
I did a little bit of that one, but I went to the Norgie ski jump in Fox River Grove,
right.
And I went to the sand dunes, the Indiana sand dunes, and put on a heavy backpack, ran up and down it. Our office building here, we're located at 55 West Wacker, and put on a heavy backpack, ran the stairs for hours. It's no fun.
Oh my God! But then there's the issue of climatizing and getting accustomed to this very extreme climate and altitude. So this is a great clip in the movie where you have to prepare for that while you're at home sleeping in this weird little tent. Let's take a look.
Alpenglow and I, in 2012, developed what we call the Rapid Ascent System. We simulate altitude, reduced oxygen environments at home, and by people spending 6 to 8 weeks in those tents sleeping at night, we can reduce the length of an Everest expedition from 65 to 70 days to down to around 30 to 35 days.
Over time, the 8 hours or so that we spend sleeping in the tents allows our red blood cells to get used to the amount of oxygen that we'll be breathing here at altitude so that you can be more efficient and safe in the mountains.
Is that kind of a cumbersome way to catch some Z's when you're in your own bed at home, but you're breathing in a high altitude kind of air?
I hate that thing. But what it does is it increases the nitrogen and tricks you, so it crowds out the oxygen, and it tricks you to thinking that you're at altitude, so your body starts kicking out red blood cells. And one of the things we were able to do is head right to base camp when we got across the Tibetan Plateau in China, which is 17,000 feet, and give you an idea of 17,000 feet, your highest Colorado peak is 14,000 feet.
Right.
So you're higher than you can get in the lower 48 just to start.
Wow, just to start. I mean, I remember being at 12,000 feet in Colorado skiing and getting the bloody nose every now and then, when I'm there on my first day. Well then, all right, let's talk about the climb itself. How long does it take? You mentioned when you're climatizing, you have to kind of stay at that level for a while. So how long is this journey?
A short answer is 5 weeks from airport to airport. You spend a lot of time at base camp getting used to 17,000 feet, then you move up to 19,000 feet, then you move up to 21,000 feet at advanced base camp. And then the highest we go before we start the climb is 23,000 feet to the North Col, it's called, which is a saddle in the ridgeline on the northeast side of Everest. And that's as high as the historic George Mallory team ever made it. He's the guy who said climb Everest because it's there.
Wow.
Before their disaster. He went, but it gets complicated. I'm giving you too complicated of an answer.
The history here.
Yeah.
But you have all climb to think about that history. Well, all right, you mentioned in the film the mental challenge, and you talked about that briefly. We'll get to that, but first, what's the most physically demanding part of this?
That's a hard answer. Traveling up to the North Pole was almost pure vertical ice the whole time. It would round out and you get breaks at points, but mostly that was pure vertical. So that was very difficult. We did that without oxygen, and your body, it's as hard as you've ever worked out, and you're doing it without any air. But the higher you go, the harder it gets, just simply because the air gets thinner.
And you can't take a break because, or the consequences would be pretty bad.
Yeah.
You got to keep working no matter how tired. Okay, the mental challenge. What's the toughest part mentally?
The mental part is the self-doubt. It comes at you like a freight train.
Wow.
And hypochondria. You start feeling, not that great that day. You think, that's it.
Something's wrong.
That's it. I'm going to die. And
Wow.
pessimism. It's really hard to keep your head about yourself, and you don't feel good the whole time you're at altitude.
Yeah.
So you lots of self-doubt.
What was that moment like when you reached the peak? You're watching it, like you said, for weeks and weeks. You reach it. You plant your flag, you do 22 push-ups. What was that immediate feeling like?
It's busy at that point, and you're thinking about the clock is ticking. You've only got so much oxygen. It's like scuba diving, but the opposite. So I was thinking I want to get all these things done while I'm on the summit and then get down safely. We ascended on summit day 2,000 feet, and we had to descend 8,000 feet to make it all the way to advanced base camp. Mm-hmm. And on the way down, we're collecting gear on the way down. So by the time we arrived at base camp, advanced base camp, my backpack was about 90 pounds.
So when your body just has nothing left, you get to the summit, you're at the beginning of your journey, of the
Yeah.
physical part of that day.
And 90% of the accidents happen on the way down. So it takes a little bit of mental discipline to say, okay, big victory.
Right.
But we still got a big day ahead of us.
We're not done yet. Yeah. You're doing all of this to raise awareness for veterans and suicide and mental health problems among veterans. Tell us about your involvement in that cause.
Well, it was just a stunt that I did on top. I decided to do the 22 push-ups because, on average, 22 first responders and veterans will take their lives every day. And I thought if I did that, it might reach a troubled guy, that someone took the time to do that. However, since then, Light the Line is a Chicago-based organization. If you remember, it's dedicated to the memory of Ella French, a Chicago police officer killed in the line of duty.
Right.
And Mission 22 also.
All right, Mike Tobin, great film. It's on Fox Nation. We're out of time. Thanks for joining us. Good night, everybody.